Scott Pruden is a freelance journalist and novelist published in magazines and newspapers around the Delaware Valley. His novel, Immaculate Deception, was published in 2010. He's now at work on his next novel.
Thank you, Gary. I'm going to break it. There we go. Now I'm going to move it up. That's better. Hi, everybody. Just as Gary said, my first novel is called Immaculate Deception. There are copies available on the pool table if you're interested, and I will take all forms of payment. Tonight I'll be reading a story that is different from what you will find in the anthology. This is an excerpt from my forthcoming novel, which is called Mystery White Boy. And it is, hopefully will be out in 2019. So thank you for listening. The Reverend Clay Clyburn returned from Sunday dinner at Miss Peacock's with his belly full, but his spirits still a bit wanting. Having told his wife the new custodian seemed to have a problem remembering to lock the entrance to the choir loft, he now sat in the front pew, bathed in the midday light streaming through the stained glass windows, his hands clasped and his head bowed. Lord, I really need your help. I realize the world is full of temptations, and I do my best to be strong in the face of them, but I feel like I'm about to be overcome. Lust has entered my heart, and I'm not sure how to make it go away. The lust involved the church's new organist, Miranda Simmons, a vivacious brunette single mother who had found Jesus late in life and decided to put the prodigious talent she developed as the keyboardist and vocalist for a popular Midlands party band to work for the church, accompanying hymns on Sundays and performing the occasional choir solo. He thought replacing the legendary Rose McWhirter, who had played organ for the church for 67 years straight until she keeled over, God bless her, during Wednesday night choir practice back in March, wouldn't have been easy. But when the church put out the call, there was Miranda, full of fresh love for Jesus and a freedom of spirit that he rarely saw among the women in his congregation. Conversations with her were punctuated by unsolicited touches on his forearm, sly grins, and gentle innuendo of a sort that made his speech stumble, in spite of the fact that on most days he was considered one of the most eloquent men in town. And then there were her feet. Oh Lord, please forgive me and spare me the temptation of her blissful feet. Because it so happened that in addition to her flirtatious nature and beguiling appearance, she was one of those organists who played barefoot. Better to feel the instrument's array of bass pedals. No demure ballet slippers over varicose-riddled feet like Miss McWhirter. No, these were the pedicured feet of a goddess. Soft and supple, embellished with festive colors on her toenails. As she padded around the sanctuary during breaks from practice, he found himself gazing upon them, then his mind lingering over them. How smooth the heels would be, the way the toes would feel in his mouth, as his tongue swirled around them. The way her feet might press together and wrap around his... But see, Lord, this is the problem. I have to be here. She has to be here. I can't make her go away without a reason, and yet these feelings won't leave me. I feel as if I have no more self-control than a common dog. Boom! Boomed a noise through the sanctuary. The Reverend Clyburn paused in his appeal to the Almighty and listened. Silence. Oh no, was someone in here? And could they have heard me implicating myself in lustful and impure thoughts? Bored. Then a plaintive whine, followed by canine panting. He opened his eyes and turned around to look back up the center aisle of the church. Nothing. But he could still hear the panting as if it was right next to him. He then thought to lean so his view would be completely unobstructed by the pews behind him. And there, 3 rows back, sat a friendly-looking basset hound, a little dollop of drool hanging from its right jowl, shifting expectantly back and forth on its hind legs as if it was waiting for the preacher to throw a ball. Well, hey, pretty boy, how did you get in here? The doors to the sanctuary were still closed, and he looked around for a moment to see if its owner might still be sitting in one of the rear pews. Hello? Anyone here? There was no reply. The drool oozed just a bit more until the dog decided to end the problem by slinging its head side to side, sending long strings of dog saliva whipping across the pews. The dog then stood and walked in circles while sniffing the red carpet with its shiny black nose, pausing after a moment to lift its right leg and urinate directly on one of the pews. No, no, no! Clyburn lunged at the dog, hoping to grab a handful of loose skin at the animal's neck. But when he reached close, the dog wasn't there. He grabbed nothing and sprawled in the aisle. He looked up to find the dog was again sitting about 3 feet away, looking very pleased with himself. From his angle, the preacher realized he could see right through the animal, getting a slightly hazy view of the altar and pulpit. Beyond the events recounted in Scripture and his tacit support for his congregants who insisted on finding Satanism, witchcraft, and the dark arts around every corner, the supernatural didn't hold much sway in his life, but he was quickly beginning to think he might have to revise that perspective. Okay, puppy, that's enough fun. I think it's time for you to go. He was still trying to trick his mind into thinking that this was a real dog. He reached for the inside pocket of his sport coat and pulled out his phone. I think it's time for me to call animal control. It was as if he flipped a switch on the animal's demeanor. It lowered its head, cocked its floppy ears back, and began to growl. But that wasn't nearly as surprising as when the dog burst into violent blue flame like someone had just lit the gas on the stove in the church's basement kitchen. Clyburn screeched and scrambled backwards, but it didn't help much. The farther away he got, the more intense the flames grew and the larger and fiercer looking the dog became. When it had reached the size of a full-grown horse, it lowered its head to the ground and bared its now huge set of teeth. The preacher scrambled to his feet, looked back over his shoulder, and ran for the doors. All he could hear behind him was the rhythmic thud of the animal's paws and its panting as it tried to chase him down. I should probably be screaming. A sane person would definitely be screaming. But there wasn't time. He ran harder than he could ever remember, determined to reach the door before the animal reached him. The momentum of his run slammed his body against the huge main door, nearly knocking the wind out of him before he grabbed the latch to swing it open. But it wouldn't turn. He jiggled, pulled, and forced with all the strength he had left, but it was no use. The dog bore down on him like a runaway freight train set ablaze. He heard a childlike whimper echo through the room and realized it was coming from him as he watched the flaming hound loping ever closer. Its jowls raised in a fierce snarl, and strings of iridescent dog slobber streaming alongside. Clyburn pushed and then realized it would just make more sense to await the inevitable. Satan had obviously sent one of his minions to collect him for his sinful thoughts. Then it was upon him. He froze and tried not to imagine what death would feel like at the hands of such a creature. He clenched his eyes shut and prayed, Lord, please forgive me for what I've done. Then he felt it. The heat, he imagined, emerged straight from the bowels of hell itself, surrounding him as the devil dog lunged, blowing open the doors to the long stairway outside, and rolling Clyburn out and down. He stopped his tumble face up in just enough time to see the creature that had tormented him dissipate in the afternoon sunlight like so much steam or charcoal smoke. Thank you.